This is BBC News. We'll have the headlines for you at the top of the hour, which is straight after this programme.
Hello and welcome to Talking Business. Here's what's on the programme this week. He's back. Donald Trump is once again in charge of the world's biggest economy. But what will that mean for the US and the rest of us? New tariffs against its biggest trading partners, the prospect of tax cuts and drilling for more oil. Just some of the ways America is set to change over the next 4 years. We'll assess what Trump 2.0 could mean for the world economy with our panel of experts this week. The head of policy at the US Chamber of Commerce gives us their assessment of the impact on business and trade. A former head of the American government's energy agency explains what drill, baby, drill really means for energy prices and supplies. And this leading expert on government finances crunches the numbers of tax cuts and spending plans and what it could all mean for the value of the dollar. Plus, All Change, the boss of one of the world's biggest law firms, tells us how his company's helping others keep up with a changing world and those policy shifts that President Trump has promised. Wherever you're watching, welcome to the show. Now, Donald Trump is back in the White House. After months of planning and speculation, he's been sworn in for a second term as President of the United States. It is, of course, the world's biggest and most influential economy. He's got a further 4 years to reshape it in his vision, and that will have an impact both in the United States, but also for millions of people around the world. Some of the changes could happen pretty quickly, perhaps even between us recording this show and you watching it. But before we delve into the issues, let's just remind ourselves of the state of the US economy that he's inherited from Joe Biden. Well, inflation has been a top concern for millions of Americans over the last 4 years. As you can see, it's fallen a long way from its peak, but prices are still rising faster than the 2% target, hitting 2.9% in December. Another thing that's come down under President Biden is the unemployment rate. It's now 4.1%, as a strong jobs market reflects companies' confidence in the economy going forward. As a result, the central bank is cautious about making more cuts to interest rates anytime soon. Whilst the cost of borrowing has fallen in recent months, it's still much higher than at the end of President Trump's first term. He's often measured his success by the value of stock markets, and over the last year, the S&P 500 index of America's biggest companies has repeatedly hit record highs, something he wants to see again. So first of all, let's hear a little of what President Trump had to say about the economy and trade.
I will direct all members of my cabinet to marshal the vast powers at their disposal to defeat what was record inflation and rapidly bring down costs and prices. I will immediately begin the overhaul of our trade system to protect American workers and families. Instead of taxing our citizens to enrich other countries, we will tariff and tax foreign countries to enrich our citizens.
Let's pick up on that now with the head of policy at the US Chamber of Commerce. It represents more than 3 million businesses of all shapes and sizes right across the United States. Neil Bradley, welcome to the programme. And I think it's fair to say the American consumer has been a bit of a bright spot in the global economy in the last couple of years. And I wonder, we've got, a returning resident of the White House. What does he need to do? What does the US need to do to keep those consumers as that global bright spot?
Yeah, you're exactly right. American consumers have been a big bright spot. That's largely been supported by growing wages in the U.S. economy that have allowed families to kind of keep up with levels of consumption. The things that the new administration needs to be worried about is a return to inflation. Trade is particularly top of that list. But here in the United States, workforce is also incredibly important to making sure that we can maintain the supply and demand balance that we need to support a growing economy.
Yeah, I want to talk about that inflation issue, though. It's 2.9%. The target, of course, is 2%. It's still some way off that. And the reason it gets interesting, not only for the US, but the rest of the world economy, is because of the potential impact that has on things like interest rates. How much is inflation on the minds of business right now when they make decisions about what they will do next?
It's very much on business leaders' minds. We have to recognize that the bout of inflation that we've gone through for the last couple of years really hasn't been experienced by most American business leaders in their professional lifetime. It was kind of a shock to the system. Now, we're not going to return to the days of kind of free money, zero interest rates that we've had since most of the period since the Great Recession in 2008, but a normalization of inflation right around 2%, doesn't have to be exactly 2%, and interest rates with a normal cost of money is going to be really critical to sustaining long-term growth.
And so people, will be forgiven for being a little confused about some of what we've heard from Donald Trump when it comes to things like tariffs, because the entire point of tariffs is to make stuff imported from overseas more expensive. That's all well and good when you can produce all that stuff domestically, but we know that biggest trading partners, Canada, Mexico, China, all in the crosshairs of the Trump administration when it comes to things like tariffs. Stuff will cost more, and that will push up inflation, won't it?
It will. And so tariffs are a tax. They increase the costs of goods. And so in that way, it can be inflationary. Of course, they're not done in isolation. What happens on regulatory policy, what happens on tax policy in the United States will also have an impact on the overall kind of costs of goods and services. But listen, we're concerned at the U.S. Chamber about the broad application of tariffs and what that would mean for the U.S. economy. They have a role in certain narrow circumstances, but broad applications would be harmful.
What are your members telling you about where the opportunities and the risks are in this administration? What are they excited about?
At the top of the list of what people are optimistic about, it's the deregulatory nature. Listen, the last 4 years, there were $1.8 trillion in regulatory costs imposed on the U.S. economy. That is historic in terms of size and scope. And so that rollback will kind of reanimate the animal spirits of the economy in a very positive way. I think we're also optimistic about where we're going on tax policy in the United States. Those combined with what artificial intelligence is going to be able to do in terms of delivering efficiency, I think means that the outlook for the future is quite bright.
One of the themes of this programme as well, and we're talking to other guests about the pace of change. We saw it with the first Trump administration. Things might change quite quickly. How do your members keep up with that?
It is a dizzying pace. We saw that in not even the first 24 hours of the new Trump administration with a historic number of executive orders and actions. I think that pace is going to continue. And so it's a challenge to keep up with. But listen, this type of animated energy, the idea that we're going to make policy decisions and move forward, actually in some ways is reassuring. So uncertainty kills business deals. We know that. And what we've dealt with for, frankly, more than the past 4 years, for quite a number of years, is increased levels of uncertainty. So if we can resolve some of these policy questions, make decisions, then businesses can quit worrying about Washington and get back to kind of operating their business and growing.
President Trump promising to make America great at manufacturing again. Manufacturing anywhere in the world often relies on imported labour. He's also pledged to crack down on things like immigration. Can America be a great manufacturer again without immigration?
When the president returned to the Oval Office for the first time, he was signing a number of executive orders, and he was actually asked this question about the workforce. And he replied that he knew we needed more workers coming into the United States, legally, of course, to be able to meet his vision for increasing domestic production. So listen, this is going to have to be a well thought out series of policies that not only encourage U.S. domestic production, but reform the things that hold it back. Excessive regulation, long delayed permitting processes, and yes, a lack of labor. And that's going to be something that is going to have to be addressed.
Neil Bradley, it's been really good to talk to you. Thank you. So what do President Trump's plans to drill more oil and gas and have more dependence on fossil fuels mean for renewable energy?
The inflation crisis was caused by massive overspending and escalating energy prices, and that is why today I will also declare a national energy emergency. We will drill, baby, drill.
So how easy will that be? I've been speaking to a former energy advisor to President Obama, who also served as the head of the Energy Information Administration. It's the US government's independent agency for analysing the energy industry and its economic impact. Adam Sieminski, welcome to the programme. And we know that on the campaign trail, Donald Trump has promised a renewed focus on fossil fuels. He said, drill, baby, drill. America already produces record amounts of oil and gas. How much more can it produce?
Well, the president said, even during his inaugural speech, that he would try to open up federal lands, offshore Alaska, to more drilling. The industry itself is pretty much working at full capacity right now. So we could keep producing the amount that we're doing now, but it's not going to be really all that easy to produce a lot more.
Yeah, and that's partly because of an infrastructure issue, isn't it? I don't think the US has built a new refinery in what's something like 40 years. I mean, it's one thing getting it out of the ground. How does it get it in the form that it needs to the people who need it?
Well, the refining is not going to be a huge problem. I think pipelines to move natural gas around the country to generate more electricity for the big data centers that are being developed all over the country is going to be very important. So one of the things that the president talked about in his speech was easing up on permitting requirements so that we can build more electric generation facilities.
Is this also a way that the president can keep down prices for consumers domestically? We know some of his promised trade tariffs could push up prices of imports. And so is he simply trying to offset in any business, but by making that energy cheaper?
Well, during the campaign, the president said that he would get grocery prices down and he would cut energy prices in half. That's not going to be very easy. Economists always focus on food and energy as one of the key aspects of inflation. And dropping energy prices is a really, really difficult task. Bob McNally, who worked for President Bush some time ago, said that he looked for the magic wand that would lower energy prices, and it didn't exist. I kind of did the same thing for President Obama back in 2012 and came to the same conclusion. There is no magic wand to get oil prices down.
We know that demand for energy is only going in one direction, given especially things like AI that is hoovering up energy at a rate of knots. Does America have enough energy in the pipeline? I'm thinking here particularly of electricity, of course. And if not, are fossil fuels the answer?
I think the answer is all of the above. Chris Wright, Trump's pick for energy secretary, said that he would like to focus on things like nuclear, commercial nuclear technology and battery improvements. Trying to single out fossil fuels as the only answer to the climate challenges we're facing is really not going to work. There are too many people in the world that don't have enough energy. All of this is going to require more energy. So we have to find some way to deal with the emissions associated with those fuels rather than trying to pick a favorite fuel that really is not going to be capable of doing the job by itself.
Talk to me about the impact of President Trump dismantling the Inflation Reduction Act. Of course, one of the key drivers of that was to facilitate a shift towards renewable energy, making things like solar and wind cheaper. If President Trump does dismantle that, and then it pushes more into fossil fuels, that narrows America's ability to diversify its source of energy, doesn't it?
Well, there are a lot of contradictions in the statements that politicians, including the president, have made. Just as an example, if you want to unleash domestic energy production, that usually means higher prices, not lower prices. And if you want to build more electric power facilities, that might mean higher prices for electricity and not lower. So, there are a lot of contradictions here. I think that ultimately the system, the government in the United States is going to try to push a lot of different solutions. I think that what they don't want to do is have massive subsidies for forms of energy.
Adam Sieminski, so good to talk to you on the programme this week. Thank you for being with us.
Okay, Ben, thank you. Bye.
Now, one of the big shadows hanging over the US economy is its massive debt burden. It grew significantly under both President Biden and in Donald Trump's first term. It's now around $36 trillion. One way to slash the debt is to cut government spending, and that's something he touched on at his inauguration.
The American dream will soon be back and thriving like never before. To restore competence and effectiveness to our federal government, my administration will establish the brand new Department of Government Efficiency.
Let's pick up on that with the executive director of the Bipartisan Policy Centre's Economic Policy Programme. Now, that's a Washington-based think tank that tries to work with both Democrats and Republicans on long-term solutions. Shai Akabas, welcome to the programme. And let me start with what we know so far. How would you characterise President Trump's approach to the economy? Because we know he said he wants to cut taxes, so therefore the government will earn less in revenue. But at the same time, he says he'll spend less, so therefore the numbers add up. Is it that simple?
So we have had a long-standing fiscal problem in the United States. This year, the big item on the agenda is tax policy. That's one of the top items for President Trump as he comes into office and Republicans in Congress, because the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which were passed during the first year of President Trump's first term, much of that is set to expire. And if it does, tax rates would go up across the board. Republicans do not want to let that happen. So they are already starting the process of figuring out how they are going to extend much or all of those tax cuts. What's really important here, though, is the fiscal impact of this. If it is extended unpaid for the full decade, that could be a cost of $4.5 trillion added to the national debt.
Let's talk, though, quickly about spending, because we know that President Trump wants to spend less as well. Where will that cut in spending come? Do we know yet?
The president has set up a Department of Government Efficiency, which is going to look at places to make the federal government more efficient, which I think is a great place to start. The problem for many years, though, has been policymakers on both sides have been reluctant to touch the real drivers of the federal debt. Those are the programs that are growing the fastest, specifically the entitlement programs that primarily go towards America's seniors, so Social Security and Medicare. And the most recent president, President Biden, as well as President Trump, have said that they do not plan to touch those programs. And without making adjustments to those programs, there's really no way to wrap our arms around the problem that we have.
Yeah, and so neatly that gets us onto that national debt at $36 trillion. It's a huge number to get your head around. It is growing all the time. And so President Trump says, yes, we need to get a handle on this. We need to tackle it. How?
That really is the $64,000 question here, or close to the $64 trillion question, given the debt that we have accumulated as a country. For too long, policymakers on both sides have been reluctant to tackle this challenge, partly because it is tough politically. People don't like when their benefits are cut or their taxes are raised. Ultimately, that's what it's going to take. Economic growth can help, but you need to make the tough choices to get there. Right now, we have a national debt that is stacking up interest at a remarkable pace. By the end of the decade, depending on what happens with those tax cuts, the interest cost that we're paying on the debt could be eating up a quarter of all the revenue that we're bringing into the country. That is not sustainable.
The other double-edged sword in all of this, of course, is the strength of the dollar right now, and President Trump hailing that as a sign that America's economy is firing on all cylinders. But of course, we know that makes American exports more expensive. How do you square that circle? How does President Trump maintain America's place in the global financial system whilst also making its businesses more competitive globally?
It's a really tough circle to square, and that is what the president and his team are thinking about as they approach tariff policy, as they approach fiscal policy. Of course, the Fed and monetary policy plays a role in this as well. But ultimately, getting our arms around the national debt and figuring out what we're going to do to tackle that challenge will have impacts on the strength of the dollar moving forward. The debt drags down economic growth by pulling investments into less productive purposes of just buying up U.S. treasuries instead of being deployed in the private sector and facilitating economic growth. There's also an element of uncertainty to all this. The president has come in with an agenda, but how that agenda will be implemented remains unclear.
And that's the impact of a strong dollar domestically. Internationally, of course, we know that it has huge repercussions too, given the sense that interest rates may not be falling as quickly as people thought. It feels like the dollar will stay stronger for a bit longer. That has all sorts of implications. Do you get a sense that the White House is concerned about those implications? Or, if we believe the rhetoric, it's America first?
Recognizing that the impacts of the decisions that we make, that a strong dollar, for example, can have significant impacts on countries that borrow in U.S. Currency. And if we are having an impact on the U.S. dollar, then it could make their operations much more challenging. Those ultimately are things that we need to be concerned about, because the whole economy is connected and it will impact the prospects for not only Americans domestically, but our impact on the global stage.
Shai Akabas, so good to talk to you on the programme this week. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks so much for having me.
As well as cutting taxes, President Trump has said he'll cut regulation as part of his efforts to boost growth. Details of the new laws are still emerging, but the pace of change was clear.
Today, I will sign a series of historic executive orders. With these actions, we will begin the complete restoration of America and the revolution of common sense.
So what does it mean for firms that are charged with helping firms navigate rules and regulations? Here's the boss of one of the world's biggest law firms, that's A&O Shearman, which was created last year by a merger of Allen & Overy with the New York-based Shearman & Sterling. Khalid, Garousha, welcome to the programme. It's great to have you with us. And talk to me about this week. We've had President Trump return to the White House. He's promised to change just about everything, if you believe some of that campaign rhetoric. What does it mean for you and your team, given that a lot of the changes could come in things like laws and rules and regulations?
On laws and regulations, it's tough to speculate, what will happen. Look, market sentiment is that Trump's plans to reduce the regulatory burden that certain industries face, along with plans to lower taxes, to decrease the overall size of the federal government, will have a positive impact on business. The incoming U.S. administration is also set to review things like merger control regulation. So the antitrust environment is certainly expected to become more pro-deal, more pro-business. That should be more favorable for activities such as M&A, which is a lot of what we do. So I would certainly expect opportunities for a lot more transactional activity in the US and beyond.
How important is it for what you do, for you and the other lawyers you work with, to have a handle on the pace of change, given what we've seen already from President Trump? How do you and your team navigate a market, an industry that is changing so quickly?
Actually, this is an issue that's faced by our clients, our international clients. They see more global opportunity than ever before, but they're also, as you mentioned, navigating an increasingly complex world. There's heightened scrutiny, greater regulatory burden, more investment challenges than ever before, growing geopolitical tensions, the energy transition, technological transformation, I can go on. So, businesses that we deal with rightly expect their legal advisors to support them in meeting these challenges, navigating their way through this increasingly complex environment. And I'd say that was the thesis for our merger, to be global, to be uniquely global, uniquely integrated, and to provide a service that no other law firm has been able to provide to our clients.
We know that compliance can be time-consuming, it can be expensive. Deregulation, of course, is designed to free up business to just get on with the matter at hand. But is it an oversimplification to say that deregulation is, across the board, good for business?
I think deregulation does create more opportunity for businesses, but it also creates risk. And that is what our clients are sort of facing increasingly, navigating a world that is increasingly complex, increasingly risky. I mean, frankly, the reason why, our clients get lawyers involved, early on isn't just to kind of deal with, disputes or deal with regulations. It's really to kind of ensure that the problems that they may face are anticipated, they're assessed, and they are addressed, whether, in an environment that is over-regulated or under-regulated.
A consistent theme on this programme is access to skilled labour. That firms tell me they just don't have enough people to do the jobs that they have available. Have you got enough trained lawyers?
Yes, absolutely. Look, as ever, for us, when it comes to talent, it's about serving our clients. The lawyer talent market at the moment, particularly in the US and the UK, is very hot. It's very, very competitive. Frankly, that it's driving up salaries, particularly, as I say, in the UK and in the US. We embrace that.
I know one of the moves that you've made to sort of free up some of those lawyers is to start implementing AI in what you do. How much of a game changer could it be?
Frankly, every conversation I have with a business leader these days will inevitably turn to the topic of AI. It is pervading all aspects of our lives and businesses. So we at A&O Shearman embraced AI very early on, and we've put that as a key component of our strategy.
Day to day, what difference is it making? What are you getting the AI to do?
Look, I certainly don't expect AI to be directly replacing lawyers anytime soon, but by late 2025, I expect most firms to be fully embracing AI tools for tasks like legal research, like contract analysis, document review. That drives efficiency, that drives cost savings. And we want to free our lawyers to work on more value add tasks, such as strategic thinking, problem solving, decision making, and leave other tasks, more routine work, more processing work, admin work, to AI.
Khalid Garousha at A&O Shearman, really good to have you on the programme this week. Thanks for being with us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
That's all for this week. You can keep up with all the latest on the global economy on the BBC News website and smartphone app. We'll see you for another edition of Talking Business very soon. Bye for now.
Hello. Saturday was a day where the clean-up could begin.